Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Speer. The casket carrying the remains of the nation's 41st president, George H.W. Bush, has arrived at the U.S. Capitol for the nation to begin a period of mourning. The elder Bush dying this past Friday in Houston at the age of 94. Among those paying tribute to the former president, the nation's current vice president, Mike Pence.
President George Herbert Walker Bush loved his family, and he served his country. His example will always inspire, and his lifetime of service will be enshrined in the hearts of the American people forever.
Bush's flag-draped coffin arrived earlier today at Joint Base Andrews outside Washington. George H.W. Bush will lie in state in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda until Wednesday, after which there will be an invitation-only funeral service at Washington National Cathedral before his body is flown back to Houston for burial. The House is expected to pass a short-term spending bill to avert a government shutdown later this week. NPR's Windsor Johnston reports funding to keep some government agencies running is set to run out Friday.
The Senate has not yet decided how it will handle the so-called two-week continuing resolution, but aides say they expect leaders to accept whatever the House passes. Republicans and Democrats are still at odds over President Trump's request for $5 billion to fund a border wall with Mexico. House Democrats say they will also try to force protections for special counsel Robert Mueller into a must-pass spending bill if the House is not allowed to vote on a freestanding measure. Congress has canceled much of its business this week as the nation mourns the death of former President George H.W. Bush. Windsor Johnston, NPR News, Washington.
New developments in the fatal police shooting of a black man in Alabama on Thanksgiving night. National Civil Rights Attorney Ben Crump today announcing results of a private autopsy of Amantech E.J. Bradford Jr. Janae Pierre of member station WBHM has more.
E.J. Bradford Jr. was shot 3 times from behind, according to an independent autopsy review. Ben Crump, the attorney representing the family, made the announcement. Crump says Bradford was shot in his head, neck, and lower back. He says the findings suggest that Bradford was running away when police shot him.
There's nothing that justifies him shooting EJ as he's moving away from him. You're not a threat when you're running away.
Bradford was shot and killed by a police officer at a mall in the Birmingham suburb of Hoover. Police initially thought Bradford was the shooter, but later said they were wrong. The investigation is being handled by the Alabama Law Enforcement Agency, who have yet to release any further details. For NPR News, I'm Janae Pierre in Birmingham.
On Wall Street, stocks gained ground. The Dow's up 287 points today. This is NPR. British Prime Minister Theresa May today brushed aside questions as to whether she will step aside if her plan for Britain to leave the EU falls apart. The so-called British exit plan, or Brexit, is due to be voted on next week in Parliament. May would only say she is confident she'll have a job after the crucial vote. May's been fighting to persuade some lawmakers that they should support the proposed exit package, which comes up for vote in the House of Commons on December 11th. Doctors should be more careful in terms of the possible downsides of some statin drugs. That's based on a new study. It focuses on potential harms from the widely used cholesterol medications. Here's NPR's Richard Harris.
Most people on statins don't suffer side effects, and the most common side effect, muscle weakness, is usually easy to cope with. People shift to lower doses or different statin drugs. But a study in the Annals of Internal Medicine says there are uncommon but more worrying side effects, such as an increased risk of diabetes. So Swiss scientists balanced the harms and benefits of statins and concluded that current guidelines are in general a bit too aggressive in recommending lifelong treatment. Scientists who recently updated the cholesterol guidelines disagree with the critique, but their new guidelines also conclude that doctors should take a more nuanced approach to prescribing statins. Richard Harris, NPR News.
Shares of cancer drug maker Tesaro soared today after giant pharmaceutical company GlaxoSmithKline said it will pay just over $5 billion in cash for the drug maker. Glaxo announcing it will pay $75 a share for Tesaro, which makes, among other things, an ovarian cancer drug. Glaxo expects the deal to close in the first quarter of next year. I'm Jack Speer, NPR News in Washington.
Back to the Paranormal Pride. I'm talking to Chuck Banks. We are going to finish up with a question from the chat room. This one is from Tom McNicholas. So he asks, how do you know when it's time to ask for help? Most people feel it may be a normal life and don't accept change even if it helps them. So how do you know when it's the best time to ask?
Well, it's one of those things where it's going to be different for everybody else. I will say as an old almost my dad was almost full-blooded English Johnny Bull. I took a lot of that bullheadedness in, and it took me a long time to ask for help. It's that trust. It's that trust center. And, ultimately, if, some people can go through their entire lives and not ask, you know what I'm saying? So I would say that if you're going through a dark time or you're having these experiences, then, find some literature, reach out and talk to some people, and see if that, rattles any cages, to open up, to get help. I look back at, three people that helped me with my situation early on. One of them was psychic medium Freddie Rivera, and you know what? He passed away about a year after we started talking about this of a heart attack. Now, I don't blame my situation on that particular event, but there's some other things. There was a paranormal investigator out of Oskaloosa, Iowa, that actually reached out to me, and she was going to come down and work, and she got sick before she could come down, and she passed away about 9 months later of cancer. George Turner, a good friend of mine out of Kentucky, sent me an iron key, and I didn't open it up right away. But the day that I opened it up, he was in a horrific car accident that nearly took his life.
And who is that?
George Turner.
Okay, I know him.
Yeah,
I got his book.
Yeah,
I've been on his show.
Yeah, great guy.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy for sure.
Yeah, I mean, truly, Tom. If I was going to say it, is you have to find peace. You have to center yourself, and you have to overcome the ego in order to ask for help. And it was definitely very hard for me, especially when these other ulterior things that took place, when I was going through that. So
there, I think for a lot of people, it's a matter of pride.
Mm-hmm.
They think they can do everything on their own, that they don't need help, no matter what the situation is.
Sure.
Whether it's addiction, depression, putting in new flooring. I don't think it matters what it is. A lot of people just won't ask for help, period. Same as, the old cartoons where the husband won't ask for directions back in the day. Now we got Google Maps telling us the wrong way as opposed to some random person.
Sure. I mean, back then it was like, hey, lock your doors. Yeah. As we get in this neighborhood, right?
Oh yeah. Well, I've been in some of those neighborhoods, but that's a whole different problem. But I mean, I actually grew up in those neighborhoods, so I don't know what I'm talking about.
Oh man.
I could tell you stories about the neighborhood I grew up in, but the thing is people look at me now and go, "Oh, she's so sheltered. She doesn't know what she's talking about." Like, little do you know, I'm not as sheltered as you think I am. But that's a whole other story. But it's just really interesting how there's some people out there that will ask for help on everything, and other people out there that won't ask for help on anything.
Yeah.
There is no happy medium as far as that goes. And of course, it's a different kind of medium in this case, but you know what I mean? There's no way to know. I guess everybody needs to know their breaking point on when they need to ask is what everybody needs to figure out. When do I ask? So I guess you'll know when it's time to ask.
Sure.
So, we have someone, Dara's asking in the chat room, she's thinking about getting a reading. And how much are your readings? And really, how much should a reading cost? Because I've seen some people charge a lot of money for a reading and other people not charge so much.
Yeah, it's it's one of those things where, a lot of people say that I undercharge, what I do. I'm actually running a special until, through the holidays. I think it's $25 for a healing. It's $25 for, a spirit reading. So I'm about half price of what I normally would. I'm normally about $50, and I always put a time on there, but I very rarely, I don't say, Aunt Sally can't talk anymore. Yeah, you know what I'm saying, at the 45-minute mark or whatever. There's a lot
You
of
don't
people.
cut them off?
No, I don't cut them off. There's a lot of folks out there that charge an absorbent amount of money for readings and whatnot, and I don't. I have a day job, so I don't need to charge an exorbitant amount of money to do a reading or a healing or anything like that, and I just try to connect. And you know what? If I cannot connect, I'll tell you that. I'm not going to say, "Oh, dearie, I'm seeing in the cards, and that you're going to find love next." I'm not going to be that guy. You know what I mean? If I'm not picking up anything, I'm going to say, "Hey, I'm sorry, but I'm not picking up anything."
Well, and then she also asked, "How do you do them? Do you do them over Skype, over the phone?"
Oh,
I know you do them in person.
Yeah, I like to do them either over Skype or Facebook Messenger where I can see your face. And I can kind of share what I'm doing and whatnot, and it takes me about an hour to ground and pound, to get ready for a healing or an energy reading session. And what's awesome is sometimes I'll be writing in my handy dandy notebook before that I make that connection, and a lot of that stuff ties in. So that's kind of how I do things.
No, I'm not going to ask that question. That one's controversial. No, I can't ask that one because it's an opinion question that might not be a good question to ask publicly.
Okay.
So, and it might make both of us look bad, and I don't want to do that. So I won't. I'll tell you. I'll wipe that question from my mind completely. So, well, I'm serious. Sometimes there's questions that come. You've done shows for a long time.
Oh yeah.
So you understand. Sometimes questions come to our mind that if you don't have a filter, you ask them.
Yep. Okay.
I used to not have a filter, and I would have asked these non-tactful questions in the past. Not since I've been on the radio, but before I was ever on. I would have asked these kinds of questions like, why in the hell did you get your hair like that? Things like that. Not thinking that it would hurt somebody's feelings later on.
Sure.
And not thinking about that I really didn't mean it at the time. So that's why I'm not asking it. So, that's just how I am. So when you do paranormal conferences, do you plan on doing readings when you go to them?
Not all of them. They're like Kansas City. The last couple of years, I've done some readings. In those most of these conventions, I just want to kick back. I want to give people like David Glidden and Josh Hurd a hard time.
That's what we want to do.
Yeah, be my goofy self and share some knowledge and that sort of stuff. So I try to shy away from that because I'm not going to lie to you. At some of these paranormal conventions, the energies there are quite the mix, and some people bring in their dark passengers and whatnot, and you know as well as I do. Myself, I tend to attract that darker energy, on occasion for whatever reason. But I pretty much try to stay away from that. Now, if somebody comes up and says, "Hey, I was wondering if you could do, an energy healing or something like that," I'll do it. I went to a paranormal convention at the Farrar Schoolhouse a couple years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And after they introduced me as the closet medium, all these women came up and they're like, "Hey, do you see my cousins, brothers, uncles, aunt, Edith? Do you see them behind me?" It doesn't work like that, folks. It does not work like that. And anybody that tells you it works like that, they're fake as hell.
See, that's the thing. I have a tendency to know who's lying to me.